Coming up, we give every Dragon Ball movie villain the Broly treatment and reimagine and reinterpret them for a new audience and a new series.
Suppose I could run you over before I killed Goku. Commencing the final test.
Dragon Ball Z! Now there are over 100 of your favorite Dragon Ball Z minifigures for you to collect. And look, there are even supersized Dragon Ball Z action figures with movable arms and legs for realistic battle action. It's a fight to the finish. But who will win? Never has there been a dark force so strong and so powerful to threaten Earth. Can Dragon Ball Z save the day? Dragon Ball Z action figures, each sold separately from Irwin.
This broadcast is intended solely
Space
for the
Ghost,
use of
15 seconds till
audience.
showtime.
Any rebroadcast, broadcast, or retransmission without the express written consent.
Ready for a power trip.
But then soon we overcame them all. One by one, side by side, we gave each other love that's real and everlasting, born. Real love. We've come a long way.
We're coming up on 2 years since the tragic passing of Akira Toriyama, a loss that made an earth-shaking impact on every fandom space you can imagine. Right down to my own best friend being so moved by the universal praise of his work that she asked me to take her into the plunge to watching all of Dragon Ball, a venture I was happy to oblige. But if you think I would take her on the easy route, you don't know how much of a mile I'll take when given an inch, as we also took periodic episode breaks to squeeze in the non-canonical Dragon Ball Z movies. I know these have become something of a joke in more serious Dragon Ball fan circles because of how wildly they vary in quality, to a point that they're all declared non-canon. But I've always had a soft spot for the movies, especially as the characters would pop up in Dragon Ball fighting games and crossovers. Most of these characters just exist to sell toys, but I'll be damned if I don't love a good toy. The example of the style over substance Dragon Ball movie villain has always been Broly, the most famous of the bunch, to the point that his movie has 2 sequels. And who wouldn't want to watch more fights about this Brick Saiyan house of muscle? What he lacked in personality or even truly gratifying lore, he made up for by being the walking embodiment of the Will Smith hype moments and aura meme. As highbrow as I like to come off, I'd be lying if I said I ever failed to enjoy Broly and all of his schlocky monster glory. But what's simultaneously true is I was equally intrigued when Dragon Ball Super announced it would be rebooting Broly, tweaking him and fully introducing him into canon. In broad strokes, he was still the gargantuan, inarticulate, legendary Super Saiyan, but huge strides were taken not only in his backstory as a refugee of planet Vegeta's destruction, not unlike Goku, but as a well-rounded, sympathetic character with relationships and desires outside of spitting ki blasts. And it doesn't hurt that he's still really good at spitting ki blasts. Super Broly was a huge success, widely agreed to be one of the best Dragon Ball installments across movies, series, anything else. In transforming Broly from a novelty into a compelling character, fans are hotly anticipating the return of. As you can imagine, this opened the floodgates for every other movie villain to potentially be doctored into acknowledgement out of the dregs of relative obscurity, frequently with the caveat that they receive a similar makeover to Broly. If I was given a chance to tell Toei what I would do with these also-ran dragon robes, I'd have this to say, going in chronological order of their first appearance. Garlic Jr. was the first Dragon Ball Z movie villain facing Goku and friends before even Raditz, if you take his non-canon film at face value, plucked out of the sort of hurriedly arranged backstory for Kami, of all people. While conceptually lofty, he never felt like he lived up to his max potential, and it's too late to make him show down with Kami the way he does in his original movie if we placed him into current canon. I decided to stray significantly from Junior's ties to Kami in my reinterpretation of the character. So let's pivot the backstory just slightly. Instead of seeking revenge for his father undone by Kami, How about a father slain by Beerus? Over the centuries, Beerus must have had many would-be proteges. We could figure one might resemble the original Garlic. Garlic was taken under the tutelage of the god of destruction to be an heir apparent, but a characteristically fickle Beerus had expectations that many can't reach, causing him at some point to dismiss Garlic. This results in a fight that ends with Garlic Hakai'd into oblivion. Beerus is unaware, however, that he left a loose end. Every trick of Destroyer God Ki he taught Garlic, Garlic taught his son, who has spent the ages since his father's death plotting revenge. It's pretty laughable to imagine Garlic Jr. as we know him holding a candle to Beerus, but if we reimagine him up to Dragon Ball's current par of power, he wouldn't be out of place. His buffed up super form could sub in for his appearance when he's overtaken by Destroyer Ki like Toppo is in the Tournament of Power. And his signature party trick, the Dead Zone, is a bottomless black hole, so he can harness his brand of destruction in an equally daunting but distinct aesthetic and theme from the usual Hakai disintegrations. I imagine Beerus acknowledges he could destroy Junior with a mere thought, but he's also a bit embarrassed he let this development slip by him. So he reframes the shakeup as a chance for Goku and Vegeta to test their skills against a destroyer who's been practicing in the shadows for eons. It could open up some interesting questions about the responsibility of Destroyer Ki and breathe new life into a sort of forgotten Dragon Ball rogue. That one was pretty straightforward, but I want to take advantage of the space the Dragon Ball movies allow for heroes besides Goku to take the spotlight against villains who would never hold a candle to him or Vegeta. Similar to the revived Red Ribbon characters in Superhero, I like the idea of villains not being immediate world enders on equal footing to Frieza, so you can play around a bit with who saves the day using them as main antagonists. Case in point, Dr. Wheelo's original movie, World's Strongest, is nearly the premise of a Master Roshi spin-off OVA. Encased in ice for so many years, he thinks Roshi is the strongest man alive, before Goku bursts his bubble. Roshi is a popular and colorful enough character that I think he's actually beyond capable of handling this premise without any interception from Goku. Keep Wheelo at his rough street level as just a big brain in a jar, and make his movie a more intimate story where Roshi takes on Wheelo himself. They're both ancient, so maybe they knew each other in the past. Wheelo was a science nerd who envied the Chad Roshi and plotted from a young age to steal his mighty body, well into his tenure as a big, scary robot. With Goku and Vegeta so distracted by training with Beerus, it'd be pretty easy to justify a sideline of secondary character-focused stories. And Master Roshi versus the embodiment of weird science that is Dr. Wheelo would be a great place to start. Turles is a pretty sad villain to revisit. Like, oh yeah, that guy has so much aura in the games, I bet he rules in this movie. And then Tree of Might is always so much more mid than you remember. Turles himself isn't even terrible, but like a lot of movie villains, he's untapped potential to no end. His resemblance to Goku is striking, but it comes off more like an elephant in the room born out of laziness when they were designing him. It just so happens that low-level Saiyans have similar genetics and look alike, which makes sense, but very little is done with this concept when you can run with it fairly symbolically in a lot of directions. Both Goku and Turles were low-level Saiyans, and Turles' only other defining characteristic is his reliance on the Tree of Might, an extraterrestrial plant that bears fruit that powers the Devourer up. Again, an interesting concept, but one that's used almost entirely arbitrarily. So make the movie more about the tree, establish that Turles has existed as long as Goku, and has grown about as strong just by eating the fruit of the Tree of Might over the years, going from planet to planet, finding worlds with enough energy that he can destroy them with the tree's roots and eat its fruit. He got so frustrated with his low-level Saiyan genetics that he sought a shortcut. That's always been the text of the character, but it's never really been played with. Make him the equivalent of taking roids versus Goku's hard work. Make him offer the fruit to Goku in hopes to drag him down to his level, only for Goku to obviously refuse. Turles can be a cautionary tale of riddling your body with the path of least resistance. He finds he's no match for Goku's actual talent no matter how much fruit he scarfs down, and all that dense power eating takes its toll. Maybe he overdoses and becomes a big grotesque abomination of a great ape. Lord Slug is a tricky one. He's maybe the earliest and most egregious offender of the principle a lot of people critique the movie villains on. That being their frequently retreads of Dragon Ball villains that already existed, right down to Slug being a Namekian who uses the Dragon Balls to wish for his youth back. He's a take-two on King Piccolo. I can't dismiss that, but I've always had a big soft spot for this big slug. His fights with Goku are really fun, feeling like the full extent of a post-Vegeta Goku fighting a Namekian, something we never otherwise get. As redundant as he is next to King Piccolo, his infectious glee really rubbed off on me when I watched his movie recently. The way he's practically pinching himself with exuberant joy that he's young again, he's hard to write off completely. But to incorporate Slug into primary canon, a lot has to change, and I think he can be distinguished into standing on his own pretty nicely. My big hook here emerged while rewatching the Tournament of Power, where we met Saunel and Palina, two Namekians from a neighboring universe who managed to hold their own in the Tournament of Power by virtue of merging with every other Namekian on their home planet. Namekian merging is a cool but sometimes underexplored concept, different from fusion via the dance or pataras, in that it's less a combination and more an assimilation. Nail and Kami both gave up their physical bodies to lend their power to Piccolo, a permanent sacrifice. Saunel and Palina saw the stakes of the Tournament of Power as dire enough that every other Namekian in Universe 6 agreed to house themselves within them forever as their world's only hope. It's a noble and pretty badass characterization, but there's something pretty terrifying about the fact that Namekian merging is essentially giving up your existence to power someone else up. At least obliquely, the bestowing party has nothing left after that. If you're wondering what my point is, my concept for Slug is to make him something of a merging junkie, a powerful Namekian who grows so lustful for even more strength that he takes other Namekians against their will and forces them to be a part of him. I don't think we've ever seen a Namekian fusion that wasn't consensual, to a point that I'm not sure that's a question they've ever breached or answered per se, but it's terrific grounds for a villain, a guy who has forcefully made countless Namekians part of himself, the spirits of millions screaming inside him, experiencing the anguish of being forced to fuel Lord Slug's vile conquest. He sets his sights on Earth, you guessed it, because Piccolo would be the crown jewel of fusion targets, the cherry atop his conquest for the strongest Namekians around to add to his ever-growing collection. You could do some cool shit that ties into him getting younger and bulkier as he inhales other Namekians, maybe after dropping by New Namek to revisit those schmucks and ruin their day a bit. Use that MO as a forced fusion obsessive, as a chance to loop back to Piccolo's own bond with Nail and Kami, and Giant Form Slug versus Orange Piccolo is just a slam dunk waiting to happen. I was talking these concepts out with Jay, who is doing the amazing job of editing this video. They suggested that if we really wanted to up the stakes, Slug could merge with every single other Namekian in the universe, leaving him and Piccolo the lone hopes to create new Dragon Balls. Maybe the heroes even need to rely on Dragon Balls made by Slug, and they're corrupted by his evil energy, and we could run down the Shadow Dragons, but good. There's actually a huge amount of potential there. So I want to be transparent. I can bend over backwards to be nice to any of the movie villains, and also drop the pretense and admit that they're fairly schlocky. That's why they have room for improvement to explore in this video. Cooler, I hold it more contempt, not because he's necessarily more egregious than any other movie villain, but because I don't find him to be any less so. Yet, he's put on something of a pedestal, I find, popping into games and crossovers over other movie villains with a lot of priority that I don't think is super earned. He's far and away the most iconic movie villain besides Broly, and this puzzles me a little because he's just Frieza with less screen time and panache, if you ask me. Sure, Lord Slug is a knockoff of King Piccolo, but that's a knockoff of a pretty good villain. Cooler is a knockoff of, in my opinion, one of the best villains in fiction, and he can't stop talking about it. It all compiles to a point that I kinda roll my eyes at the guy. But this video is about building these characters up and finding ways to let them stand on their own. On paper, Cooler is Frieza's brother, but I think you'd have to go to some serious lengths to explain how that's the case when neither Frieza nor King Cold ever mention such a person. Mulling over possibilities for this character, I have Jay to thank again when they proposed that Cooler's obscurity among his family could have been begotten by him being born a runt with an extremely low potential power level that caused him to be dismissed by King Cold, who would favor Frieza and his more forward strength, which would add a lot of context and substance to Frieza's nature as a spoiled brat favored by his father, while Cooler is left with a bad case of red-headed stepchild syndrome. Given how put upon and venomous Cooler's personality has always come off, I really like this idea. I thought it fit the character like a glove, and Jay was gracious enough to let me purloin it fully for this video. Since Cooler wasn't put on combative front lines, he'd have time to devote himself to scientific research. Even before Metacooler, his second form always had this sort of armored aesthetic that I figure could be reimagined into him exploiting technology and maybe sci-fi medicines of a sort. He uses these assets to set out on his own conquest. Given Frieza embodies power through privilege and Goku represents power through hard work, Cooler could poise himself on ingenuity. Not an egghead per se, but someone who feels steadfast that scientific discovery is an avenue for power that will always outpace physical might. This would allow an easy path to Metal Cooler down the line. Plus, his armored squadron always had a sort of weird cerebral angle to them as well. They could come off more scientifically augmented as opposed to the more hefty Ginyu Force. I imagine he was pretty satisfied with his own corner of the galaxy, outliving Frieza's empire, smugly sitting in an ivory tower all of these years until word reaches him that Frieza is alive again, allowing him to enter the narrative proper, a rival to both Frieza and Goku.
3 epic features, 1 legendary villain. The Dragon Ball Z triple feature. Broly, the ultimate in Saiyan power. Digitally remastered. Uncut. With original Japanese audio. Broly, the legendary Super Saiyan. Broly is on the warpath and his targets are the most powerful warriors in the universe. Broly, the second coming. Broly is back and more deadly than ever. Can Gohan and Goten finish him off? Bio Broly. Broly is reborn with incredible new powers. Earth's Day of Reckoning has dawned. The Dragon Ball Z triple feature containing all 3 Broly epics, coming soon to DVD and Blu-ray.
In keeping with Toonami tradition, we've changed the lineup, trying to keep it fresh.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Don't count. I'm just getting started.
Cards on the table, Android 13 is actually my favorite of the movie villains. In every measure, he's little more than another android designed to kill Goku. but I truly think his fights are inexplicably some of the most well-choreographed and memorable in the whole Dragon Ball franchise. He doesn't have much personality to speak of in his original iteration, but Chuck Huber gave him the iconic Southern accent and a performance that, if facetiously, gave him a ton of personality. Let it be known I far prefer Huber's voice work over his stance on vaccines. Even his super form, ridiculous as it looks, stands in line with the theme of the character. He Kirby'd up the spare parts of his comrades and became a mismatched, unstable hodgepodge, something I feel like folks never consider when they point out how garish his look is. It's all cool stuff I'd love to build on. In movies like Superhero, they've been having a lot of fun expanding on Dr. Gero and how he fits into the Dragon Ball universe. A lot of folks are quick to wonder if 13 is modeled after a younger Gero, and I could see that, but he also has more than a passing resemblance to androids 17 and 18. Something I've always wondered about those two is how they wound up turned into cyborgs by Gero. Were they kidnapped, volunteers, were they lured with a trail of designer clothes? To that end, my idea, if a bit trite, is to develop 13 as 17 and 18's father, also turned into a cyborg by Gero. His name would of course suggest he was converted first. Maybe he was a close colleague of Gero who felt the benefits of being turned into an android outweighed those of his own humanity. From there, you could make him a real cold-hearted motherfucker or a sympathetic villain. Maybe he gave up his twins and damned them to be turned into androids 17 and 18 for selfish reasons. A pride in his own cyberization or a big payoff from Gero who needed test subjects. Or maybe he ends up with some sort of illness as a human and he begs his colleague Gero to save him via cybernetics. But Gero goes a step too far and virtually makes him a brainwashed enforcer, one who now owes a debt in the form of his kid's servitude in addition to his own. Either way, for the love of God, keep the Southern accent and the trucker hat. It'd be easy enough to explain that Commander Magenta reawakened him from some long locked away basement, and from there, the rest can absolutely be history. This brings us to Bojack, who we're basically building from the ground up. He's fun to play in the video games to a point that I forgot he's just about nothing in his debut film, which devotes a ton of screen time to Mr. Satan's Wacky Olympics and leaves the Jolly Green Bojack with little to really chew on as a character. For whatever it's worth, his design is memorable, and he has moments, killing his own underling just for the love of the game. It's a start to a memorable bad guy. We know he has ties to the Kais, who sealed him away in King Kai's planet until Cell destroyed it. But even if that's a hard place to start with, I would want to avoid overlap with Zamasu when it comes from an evil stemming specifically from that corner of Dragon Ball's mythos. I think there's more to play with via the premise around him than the character himself. His movie involves him interrupting a modest Earthling tournament hosted by Mr. Satan. It'd be cool to stretch out that idea a bit. If Dr. Riolo was an opportunity for a Master Roshi focus, make Bojack the villain of, hear me out, Mr. Satan the movie. Picture this, Mr. Satan has been hanging around Jocko, and Jocko is telling him stories out of school about a ruthless space pirate with a huge bounty on his head. Mr. Satan gets all inspired and figures that someone resembling this Bojack guy would make a great supervillain for his next movie, and he produces a film all about his triumph over this hypothetical galactic despot. Probably due to Jocko's carelessness, a copy of the movie reaches the real Bojack, who cruises down to Earth looking to settle the score with the warrior that claims to have beat him. Mr. Satan is obviously way out of his depth here, and you get all kinds of shenanigans and hijinks of him trying to reckon with a villain that once before could only be beaten by Gohan. Bojack's chief traits, the little we have, are those of an arrogant bully. He loves throwing his weight around with a cruel smirk, Mr. Satan would be a fun character to counteract that with. Maybe we reenact the events of the original BoJack Unbound movie and have Mr. Satan declare that BoJack has to win a personalized Mr. Satan hosted tournament before he actually gets to challenge him. This allows Mr. Satan to hide behind Android 18, Yamcha, Tien, maybe even Majin Buu if you want to blow smoke up BoJack's ass, but BoJack tears through them, and Mr. Satan is left with no other option but to confront the warrior himself. Maybe it's at this point that Mr. Satan challenges BoJack, but they fight on his movie set. BoJack uses some huge key attack and Mr. Satan hides, throwing out a prop charred skeleton. Fun slapstick like that. Maybe it's after this that Gohan and Videl engage BoJack in a real fight. Or, if you want to stick to the more comedic route, maybe the tape of Mr. Satan fighting BoJack goes viral, and BoJack just chills on Earth as a movie star. He figures he far prefers having adoring fans over conquest. That could be kind of a fun way to send off a villain, besides blowing them away with a super Kamehameha for the billionth time. Far removed from the character as we know him, I'm aware, but frankly, come on, I wasn't working with all that much in the first place. Janemba is practically who this video was made to showcase. Just about everyone can agree from a standpoint of fight choreo and animation, Fusion Reborn is one of the best movies, and Janemba is memorable beyond reproach. A veritable Swiss Army knife of abilities with cool aesthetics. But Kami doesn't give with two hands. A monster created by a freak accident involving evil energies pumping through the underworld and an unsuspecting custodian, Janemba is less a personalized villain and more an exciting monster. One thing we could take advantage of is how closely Fusion Reborn's premise hinges on Goku pursuing martial arts between the events of Cell and Majin Buu when he's training in the afterlife. Introduce a rival of Goku from Otherworld. Maybe another pupil of King Kai that he's taken up now that Goku is spending more time with Beerus. Not necessarily Pikkon, but someone to that effect. Goku thrashes this new rival and embarrasses him a bit. His ego's a bit fragile and he seeks out some drastic sources of power. That being evil underworld goop. Rather than by accident, the genesis of this Janemba is this rival character's ambition. Maybe even show that all of the evil juice has the memories and or essence of bad guys Goku has blended up and sent to Hiffle, which would explain Janemba's vague resemblance to other villains. Janemba emerges from his endeavor to mainline all of that evil energy in his first oversized beast form, where he's imbalanced and doesn't have control over his new power. Goku needs Vegeta's help just like in that original film, and as Gogeta, Big Janemba is just no match. Gogeta, in his hauteur personality, taunts that Janemba can't hope to match him by leaning on the vestiges of other people that failed to beat Goku. This activates a self-realization within Janemba, who shrinks down to what we know as his super form, more closely resembling himself before his transformation, and turning Janemba into a soft-spoken, if haunted kind of villain. A cautionary tale of pushing one's limits in pursuit of power. Willow always suggested a sort of Jekyll-Hyde dynamic, where Big Janemba remains the hardly articulate monster, but Super Janemba has a more intelligent and intentional demeanor. She suggested something similar to Sephiroth, which I kinda can't get out of my head when imagining this hypothetical interpretation of the character. This takes us to the last movie villain, Hirudegarn, and honestly, we're not reworking him as much as Tapion if we're being real. Hirudegarn is a roaring kaiju, his design goes hard, but there's nothing upstairs. He fills that job well, and doesn't have the same potential to rework that Janemba does. But we can rework the movie around him a bit, and the hero that accompanies him, Tapion, who's practically so not broke you'd have to wonder why fix him too. Wrath of the Dragon isn't really connected to much contradicting lore, except for the fact that Tapion gifted his sword to Trunks that he wields in the future. With the Goku Black Arc in the rear view, there's a chance to make something more intentional out of this. The departure of future Trunks from the present leaves a Big Brother-shaped void in the heart of the younger Trunks. He puts two and two together that if his future self carries a sword, he has to get that from somewhere, and he internalizes that as an early step into turning into the man he wants to be. He asks his dad for a sword, and Vegeta spits on the idea. What kind of self-respecting Saiyan would ever carry a weapon instead of relying on his own two hands? This snowballs into a fight wherein Vegeta slights the memory of future Trunks. Deep down, the poor guy is a bit jealous that future Trunks is the role model he can't seem to live up to for his own son. A big argument erupts, spoken like proud warrior brats on both accounts, and Trunks runs away from home, into space, I guess, spoken like an emotionally immature Saiyan boy. Trunks speeds across the cosmos, his tears streaming behind him, that his father would besmirch the memory of the only big brother he ever had. And he sees chaos breaking out on a distant planet, Konats, where the revolutionary hero Tapion wages battle with the unrelenting monster Hirudegarn. Trunks quickly recognizes in Tapion the fearless visage of future Trunks, and he quickly attaches himself to the warrior in hopes of being his protege. Tapion is resistant to endangering a kid like this, but he takes a shine to Trunk over time as he proves he can hold his own. Vegeta comes speeding over at this point, obviously concerned for Trunks, even though he would never admit it. He regrets losing his temper, and he is insecure over losing his son. So imagine his reaction to seeing Trunks under Tapion's tutelage. Vegeta and Tapion throw down, Trunks is conflicted and heartbroken. To top it all off, Hirudegarn bursts into the scene. It's hard to imagine Vegeta sweating over a foe like this, but suppose for a moment his ego got the better of him when he recklessly challenged Tapion. He burned through more energy than he should have, and he's just not super helpful here. Trunks and Tapion fight the beast, and things take an unexpected turn. Trunks is vulnerable, and Tapion throws himself in the path of Hirudegarn's oncoming energy wave. Tapion leaves his sword to Trunks with his dying breath, and both Trunks and Vegeta are filled with anguish. Vegeta takes a step back and lets his son have the honor of destroying the beast that destroyed Tapion, which leads to a good chance for Trunks to reach an exciting power development outside of Gotenks. I think it's a boost the character really needs narratively and practically. Trunks wins out, and Vegeta encourages keeping Tapion's sword as a memento, grateful of the warrior's sacrifice. What I wanted to explore with each of these was there was an avenue opened up toward Dragon Ball's secondary cast. Trunks, 17 and 18, Mr. Satan, you get the idea. I'd love to see them all get the same spotlight Piccolo and Gohan did in Superhero. And at the risk of climbing my own Korin Tower, I think I did a pretty good job actually crafting these into what could become real narratives. I can't imagine every single one of these being implemented within reason, but I was excited to illustrate how even the sort of strange characters have a place to start and reclaim some relevance within Dragon Ball before they all get soloed by Base Kaba.
Continue.